26th day of August. November. Did I say August? What the hell am I thinking? 26th day of November 2024. Welcome everybody. Hope you're doing okay. At least better than I am anyway. We got a great show for everybody tonight. Somewhere. Somewhere. What the hell, eh? Somewhere over the rainbow. Spam callers again. We're not even got the show started. We got spam callers calling in. You're doing pretty good when you got spam callers calling in before the show starts. There we go. And we're up and running. Strong quake hit Japan's Noto region, but there's no tsunami danger. And this is was on the opposite side of the January the 1st quake. I'll show that to you. Come up in a second here. Let's go backwards, though, first to January the 1st. So there was an earthquake today, but that's not even supposed to be there. I screwed up somehow. So ignore that one. Register at the highest levels. Oh, yeah, that's right. So the one they had, it is supposed to be there. Let's do this again. So in January the 1st, the earthquake that they had registered the highest levels of 7 on Japan's seismic intensity scale in the town of Shika. So this was January the 1st. Now, Shika is where they got a nuclear power plant. I'm going to take you back in the time machine for a second. I believe this picture was Shika. Don't quote me on that, though. In the town of Shika was a 7 out of a 7 on Japan's seismic scale, intensity of 7, which is the same as a 10 of a 10 earthquake in North America, for instance. Japan uses the Shindu scale, which only goes to 7, so you got to multiply by 1.428. Okay, here we go. Back to today, November 26, 2024. We're going to show you some pictures from January the 1st in a little bit. And when I get to them, I'll let you know that they're not from today. They're from January the 1st. So the Noto Peninsula, Ishikawa Prefecture, Noto Peninsula, is that red marker they got up there. But if you notice, they got 2 red markers up in the corner there and an orange one. These are... They're talking about earthquakes. So was there an earthquake up there today? Also? Because that's where they just opened, or they restarted one of their power plants in Onagawa, or Miyagi Prefecture. That's exactly right where that other nuclear power plant is that just started up. Right? And that corresponds exactly... We'll go down that hole a little bit deeper in a few minutes here. I hope everybody's doing well today. We've got a poll for everybody today. Is fusion energy a useless investment? It's worse than useless. You're just going to steal your life savings. There is no fusion, right? There's a fusion is the same as a small modular reactor. It doesn't exist in that particular context. And a fusion reactor is going to need around 56 kilograms of tritium-3H. And currently, the stock worldwide is around 9 kilograms. You got a long way to go before they even come up with the fuel. They haven't even got that one solved, let alone the design or anything else. It's simply meant to displace reality. So, and it's a purposeful distraction from geothermal that actually exists. We'll come back to that, and Clearly, that's what's going on. So the quake now, they're still recovering from a deadly quake earlier this year. There's over 100,000 buildings were destroyed, I believe, on January the 1st in the same spot. There was no danger of a tsunami. Now, what happened in January, and we covered this last night, bizarrely, what happened on January the 1st was a fault line that was 3,000 to 4,000 years old, inactive, had ruptured. And the Shika nuclear power plant was right on that fault line. Off the western coast of Noto Peninsula, a depth of 10 kilometers. So the earthquake today was 6.2 miles deep. It was, and as usual, Japan will give you a latitude or a longitude, but they won't give you both of them per se. And this is a different story, but because the first story, I got like 5 of these stories on today's earthquake to cover, but we got a little interlude coming up, and then we'll get back into these stories. It'll make sense when we get through it. And so this was from another story from the day. Multiple stories had reported this facet. Public television said no abnormalities were reported Tuesday at the nuclear power plant in the northern tip of the Noto Peninsula, which is the Shika nuclear power plant. 2 idled reactors, they've been down, but the fuel pools at the top of the buildings, because they're boiling water reactors, Mark IVs, have double fuel pools at the top of each of the buildings with decades of 3 decades of reactor cores stored in them. 2 idle reactors, this is today though they're talking about, at the Shika nuclear plant suffered minor damage. There was no radiation leak. There was an interesting connotation, suffered minor damage. Yeah, like what? So on January the 1st, it was 75 to 100 miles of the coastline was lifted up. So the harbor over there doesn't exist anymore because 75 miles of the coastline and shore, in the communities themselves, had lifted up. And these pictures you can see, now this is January the 1st, 2001, New Year's Day. This probably happened because Japan is so evil, growing food in a nuclear wasteland. This is coming back to haunt them per se. But you can see this fault line it was 150 miles long on shore that went right across on an angle, a 45-degree angle of the Noto Peninsula. And so this would normally be level with the sidewalk. You can see where it's raised up on a shop. The fires that burnt, there was also a tsunami that came in right alongside of this spot at the tip, the northeastern tip, I believe it is, of the Noto Peninsula. And that district was over 1,000 years old. The tsunami, as you can see, had washed boats up high and dry, done a significant amount of damage. So the pictures I'm showing you are January the 1st pictures from the previous earthquake they had in 2024. They were abandoned, and we done polls. We covered this for like 26 days or something, because we believed the Shika nuclear power plant had a meltdown in the fuel pool, and that they covered it up. Something happened, because I don't waste 26 days on nothing. I don't do that for a joke, right? My time is important. And so the whole Noto Peninsula, they had around 1,500 landslides. It was a devastating earthquake. I mean, it toppled large buildings, multi-story buildings got toppled. The road, you can see, because a lot of times the pictures don't give you context, right? So when you look at a picture like that, though, you get some context of how significant it really was. This damage was caused by the tsunami. This was January the 1st, and this is the last picture from that series. And you can see how it rose up so high, it broke up all the pavement, but you can really see the difference, right? So even if this wasn't broken, you can see trying to drive up at it there would have been impossible. So it gives you context of how far up. And this was 75 to 100 miles of the coastline. So there's headlines I didn't get to, not very many of them, 10 or 12 of these short headlines I'm going to walk through. So this was Conference of Parties 29, was held in Baku over the last couple of weeks. It ended on the 22nd, I believe it was. Countries endorsed global carbon market framework. So this was day one. So on day one, they came out, the first announcement, which it usually lasts 2 weeks, right? The first announcement was they endorsed a global carbon market, which is horrifying, because here you got a non-elected corporation is going to tax everybody on the planet. And all 195, 200 countries that are signed on with UN are going to implement that. And then the rest of the countries are going to be in slavitude because of that. And so then the rest of the Conference of Parties 29 was just whitewash. The whole Conference of Parties was about pushing through this. They done that with no debates, no conversations. Nobody knew what was happening. The very first announcement was that they had passed a carbon market per se. Conference of Parties 29 ideas for raking in the coin was putting levies on business class flights. You know it's not going to happen to them. It's going to end up being on the passengers, the second class, the third class, which everybody apparently is if you're not part of these nightmares, and bond trades. So this was just a few of the things they were talking about. They can tax in all these countries to raise money so UN can have a bunch of money and feel good about themselves. Associated Press reported Earth's biggest polluters aren't sending leaders to United Nations climate talks. Why would they? United Nations doesn't have any sovereignty over any country. It's insidious what they're getting away with. And why would you give these people trillions of dollars, become so powerful as they already are, and to give them trillions of dollars is the most absurd thing conceivable. In a year of weather extremes, the reason the weather is extremes is because of 80 years of emissions from the nuclear industry. Right? Gas, oil, and coal emissions are carbon. They create plants and trees and humans and insects and birds. Nuclear kills plants and trees and insects and birds and humans. And nuclear fallout, which is like an invisible snowstorm, is the only emissions that actually symmetrically covers the entire planet. And each snowflake is actually radiation. Think of it as a snowstorm, so you can visualize it. But instead of snow, think of it as each snowflake, instead of being a snowflake, is a man-made isotope that is pulsing energy almost at the speed of light forever. And so this energy has to go somewhere. And this is full-body X-rays for all the species in the biota and the ecosystem, the biosphere. Conference of Parties 29 say agri-food systems transformations holds the solution for climate change. Control the water, control the food, control the people is more like it, right? The interesting thing about this is for 40 years, most of the food being produced in North America is GMO. And like Mothers for America had commissioned a study on corn on the cob, GMO corn on the cob versus organic corn on the cob. And it went from 5,500 parts per million of calcium per corn on the cob to about 200 parts per million of calcium per corn on the cob for GMO. And same thing for potassium, magnesium, iron, carbon, everything else. It was engineered out of it, and they had engineered toxins and dioxins and formaldehydes and other toxic, what they call built-in pesticides, so to speak. But you're going to be eating that pesticide, this man-made so-called pesticide that's genetically put into the food. And so then the outcome of the study was that you would have to eat 428 corn on the cob, GMO corn on the cob, to get the same amount of calcium, potassium, magnesium, iron, and everything else you would get from an organic corn on the cob. You literally had to fill up the back seat of your car with GMO corn on the cob, get the same amount of nutrition as you would from a single organic corn on the cob. And one of the authors had done an interview and summed it up. He said you would get more nutrition licking a stamp than you would from eating a GMO corn on the cob. And these are the people that were behind this. Why would we want? The United Nations loves GMO. And then every country that they tricked and deceived, the politician that represents your countries, that is part of this organization, are the ones that are cutting your throats. Carbon Brief. We covered a story on them the other day where they lied so much about nuclear. We done half the show in order to challenge everyone in their lies in a single story. Conference of Parties Day 2 live. UN Chief cautions world leaders, says pay up or face the climate-led disaster for humanity. So no matter how much money you give them, they can't fix that. It's 80 years of emissions from the nuclear industry on top of that, and I'll explain that to you in a second. Fukushima nuclear debris arrives at a lab after a secret journey. And this was the size of a grain of rice that we're talking about. After a journey kept secret for safety reasons. And so they spent 4 years designing a robot, and all it does is it pinches. It's not a robot. It cost $48 million. They call it a robot over and over and over, right? They call it a robot over and over and over. Here we go. It was $48 million. That's the robot there at the top of it. This is what they got there. It just goes pinch. Right, it's got a long neck, and like calling this a robot is absurd. It doesn't do anything on its own. All it does is allegedly reached into the building and got a size of the fuel. He said was the equivalent of picking up something the size of a grain of rice. And this is what they used. And $48 million. They didn't need to do that, though, because the buildings were destroyed. They could have got fuel easily. It was simply meant to manipulate you. And they can get that same amount anywhere on the planet because the plumes covered the entire planet in 19.5 days, 468 hours. How many delegates has each country registered for Conference of Parties? Delegates. It was like 65,000 people, right? But there was a lot of so-called delegates, the traders in these countries, each of these countries. And Baku itself was almost 1,000 people. Brazil sent almost 1,000 people. Turkey sent over 400. United Arab Emirates sent 495. And then you got the overflow, right? When you tally all of that up. These are all people there to sell your souls. Going meeting up with a secret organization to deprive you of your sovereignty and your future. International Atomic Energy Agency says Japan is accurately monitoring radiation. This is the IAEA. They're the least trustworthy organization. They're UN, right? They're UN. I see the spammer called me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times in a row. Isn't that something? The pro-nuclear community trying to interrupt the beginning of the show. So, International Atomic Energy Agency, who admitted they didn't go there for 12 years, because it's only the homeless and the destitute that goes there. TEPCO is responsible for the protection of workers against the occupational exposures to radiation, not the International Atomic Energy Agency. They don't have any sovereignty over any country. They don't have any influence, allegedly, but they do, don't they? The International Atomic Energy Agency, of course, refuses to acknowledge. See each one of these communities? This line here, they're only acknowledging cesium-137 for the third line over right here where my finger is, that row. per square meter in these communities. These are absurd numbers. And each of these communities, literally every building in each community is entitled to be decommissioned or decontaminated. You can't decontaminate a building. I mean, each of these communities is surrounded by millions of one-ton bags of radiation that they picked up. But that doesn't, you're only talking about 3% of the land, so everything's immediately contaminated again. So when you think of each of these communities are full of people and abandoned by the International Atomic Energy Agencies and United Nations and ERPA and UNSCLEAR and the ICRP, all the UN's controlled opposition have abandoned every one of these communities. And these numbers are absurd numbers. And they're only talking about the gammas, cesium in particular, not talking about any other gammas. And each of these communities are surrounded by millions of one-ton bags of radiation. And this is not all the communities. This is not the only element that's going to be in those communities. This whole industry is set up to destroy everybody's future and every species on this planet. That's all they're good at. Officially, as of the International Atomic Energy Agency last year, said that never happened. Officially, the International Atomic Energy Agency said last year that never happened. All of that is now no longer happened. But I can assure you it happened. That's Reactor 4. And there was 8 fuel pools at the top of the buildings. That's 9 reactor cores gone. And that's Reactor, the Medusa, the plutonium mixed oxide reactor. And 8 fuel pools at the top of that building are gone. These communities are all abandoned. There's millions and millions and millions, 30 million one-ton bags. International Atomic Energy is not your friend or anybody else's friend at all. And they didn't stop growing food in the nuclear wasteland, and they're so brazen that they grow it right alongside the one-ton bags of radiation. The International Atomic Energy Agency hasn't come out a single time, or any university, or any media, and condemned that or denounced it. Not once. They never stopped growing food in the nuclear wasteland. They're so disgusting and despicable to grow right alongside the one-ton bags of radiation. And then the journalists, they get bank. I almost didn't do a show tonight. My back is so bad I had to get a pillow and put behind me. But an hour before the show started, I had to go out and pass out. Oh. Spammers call me again. China's going to conduct sampling of treated water. Treated water. You can't treat the water of Fukushima. We're going to get to the Noto Peninsula earthquake in a little tiny bit. Water with 1 sievert per hour, 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. You walk past it, by the way, was leaking directly into the ocean. 2012. Where was China in 2012? China to conduct sampling. You know, post-Fukushima, there was 14% of every 100,000 children need open-heart surgery for congenital malformations. You're talking about 14,200 children per 100,000 needs open-heart surgery. These are unimaginable numbers. And whenever I go to the doctor, I'll ask him about stuff like that. I said, do you think that's pretty high? And they're like, holy crap. You literally, their mouths are wide open, they're stopped in their track, and they're like, what? Like they're shaking. China to conduct sampling of treated water at the Fukushima plant. Well, shouldn't they be doing samplings of the buildings that are completely destroyed? And when I say completely destroyed, I'm not kidding you. I mean, they built a contraption over it to hide it from you. They put these great big huge panels. This is a single panel. It's put there by a crane and is held there by gravity. It's built off-site. It doesn't physically touch the building because clearly if you put anything on that building over there, when you actually understand what the building looked like, that's going to collapse, right? The building doesn't physically touch it. And then the media, they put this contraption over it, and then the media worldwide pretended that they were in the building on top of it, 150 feet above that stump. Like, this is not a game. We're in real trouble here. If it wasn't so important, I would have took the night off because my back is shot. Because I fell down and hurt myself a few weeks ago. At least my hand's healed up anyway. It's almost back to normal. Another week or something, it'll be back to normal. Major earthquake. I hate it when you put the word quake there without the word earthquake. How can you have a major earthquake and then not give it that prominence? Instead, just give it half a word, a major quake. Rocks the Noto Peninsula in central Japan. That's today's story. Well, let me come back to this story first. One more time. China to conduct sampling of the treated water. I just want to go down that nasty road for 1 second before we jump back into the earthquake and the rest of the news. I'm not sure how far I'll get out of me tonight. Just bear with me here. And last night I was, when the show was over, I was trying to play one of James Lucett's latest song, his most recent song. And when I'm playing the outgoing song, I'll get up and do a few odds and ends. All of a sudden I realized the song wasn't playing anymore. I got incredible bandwidth here. So I got to download it so they can't do that to me no more. I really like that song. A lot of his songs. He got 170 up there, for goodness sakes. What am I supposed to be doing here? Okay, hang on. I got to watch now. I twist my whole body now. Just, as long as I can get a show and I don't give a shit. Oh yeah, tanks. Hang on. It's ridiculous, eh? Here we go. It's such a weird story that it's important that I challenge it, right? So they have had 1,000 tanks. They have 1,000 tanks, right? Let me touch up on that first. Yeah, we almost didn't get a show in, and then I took painkillers about an hour ago, and they worked enough I can come out and get the show. I had everything ready, and that's when my back gave out on me. I was just sitting here in the studio, and then my back just died on me. Risky stalemate as science battles human fears at Fukushima. That's the wrong spot. That's the end of it. So, right there. Yeah, August the 20th, 2013, Mary Yamaguchi. They have 1,000 tanks. 1,000 steel tanks. You know how many tanks they got today? 1,000. In 2014, Mary Yamaguchi, they had 1,200 tanks. In 2017, yeah, they had 900 tanks. And look at this picture here. Imagine trying to walk with both feet flat on the ground. And that the stuff he's walking on are steel plates, by the way. Those tanks are empty because if you fill those tanks up at the 2.2 sieverts per liter of beta that they acknowledge in the water that they were, because you're spraying water over a melted reactor core is totally different than fuel in a pool, which is nasty too, right? But you're talking about something that melted down, and you're talking about 6-7 sieverts per liter. But just beta alone, the tanks would be about 1.4 million sieverts. And the tanks, even if they were 6 feet thick lead, can't shield you from that. The tanks are empty. Because all the earthquakes are there. If they filled the tanks up with that stuff and had an earthquake, they would lose control of that site. It's only the homeless and destitute that are there. Japan will have to dump the radioactive water in the Pacific 2019. And this line right here in the beginning, 1,000 tanks, 2019, was it? Yeah. 2021, they got 1,000 tanks. So in 2013, they got 1,000 tanks. 2000 and Mary Yamaguchi again. Mary Yamaguchi in 2023. They got on this line right here, my fingers two over there, 1,000 tanks. Mary Yamaguchi. See, they lost everything. There's nothing in the tanks. What you want to believe is that they got the tanks and then everything is in the tanks, right? It's simply not true. They lost everything right away. Now, the filtration system that they talk about, I'm just going to touch on that and then we'll get through the rest of it. So, 2014 April, the ELP system has yet to function reliably, but the ELP system didn't exist in 2014. 2014, they think they finally have the ELPS decontamination system operational. That was August. But the reality of it was that didn't happen until 2015, allegedly, if it ever happened. You can't filter the water. So this is 2013. In 2013, they were just building the ELPS system. In 2013, they had 1,000 tanks and they were all full. Okay, let me get back to that stuff we were just doing. So the ELP system didn't work, and then there was the Areva system, which is the same as the ELP system. The Areva system in 2014, that was August, was unused and kept out of operation. They allegedly did try to turn it on, but it became so radioactive they couldn't go near it again. The groundwater bypass operation 2014 had no effect whatsoever. They promised to install a fence for $1 billion. You can't build a fence to stop radiation when everything is already gone. I know that sounds crazy, but that's the way it really works. The ice wall not only didn't meet expectations, it simply didn't work. It doesn't have no top and it doesn't have no bottom. And then you have all the typhoons coming through. You have all the snow, the rain. And you're pouring water on these sites anyway. The water runs straight down through the ground. And the design of these sites is they build them on shale just in case this should ever happen. So the water doesn't cause liquefaction at the surface, because that would mean you have to get off the site. And then the Kurion system, the series systems. Now the problem with all of this stuff is that you're talking about incredible sieverts per liter. And so you can't put that into a filter, because now you can't change the filter after 10 minutes. After 20 minutes, you can't get back in the building. After 1 hour, you can't get near that building. It simply doesn't work. And that all the lines that is carrying this incredibly toxic stuff, I'll just show you an example of it maybe. But we have incontestable, unassailable documentation on everything. We don't talk about it unless we back it up with facts. And the problem is, it's such a complicated story, the average person has no hope in hell of working it out on their own. They might, but they won't. It's going to be pretty rough to find all the documentation, because the industry has so much propaganda out there, right? They're not calling, they're not spamming me over and over and over because I'm boring. They're doing it because they're cowards, and that's all they can do, right? So this kind of stuff going down a pipe means you can't walk over the pipe. That's a lethal dose right away. You can't walk alongside the hoses or the pipe that's carrying that to the tanks, because that's a lethal dose. If you fill the tanks up with this stuff, you can't walk past the tank, because that's a lethal dose. And then by proxy, the filtration system is all, right? They show you the pictures of this incredible looking complicated machine with pipes and hoses everywhere. The minute you turn that on, you can't go back in that building. They can't turn it on. They know that. Everything's put directly into the ocean. You can't filter it. The filter would be so toxic, you can't change the filter. How are you going to change the filter when you're filtering at these numbers? When 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. We're only talking about energy. We're talking about just pure gamma shines, neutron bombardments, beta rays, X-rays, alpha shine, everything else. All I'm talking about is science. I'm not talking about all the nonsense. Okay, let's get back after it. And by the way, the buildings blew up. Or gone. Everything was gone. Here's the media pretending they're on top of the buildings. Now you can say, well, Dana, the media wouldn't lie to us and go on your way and pretend that it didn't happen. But that's all you're doing, right? You're just being a moron by doing that. You're just being a piece of shit like them by doing that. Major quake rocks Noto Peninsula, central Japan today. And so this happened last night. It's daylight down there right now. We have a live camera out of Japan, allegedly, if you to believe the Japanese. Just let me bring that up for 1 second, because just having one story on the go at the one time is not good enough for Dana. So this is a picture of Reactor 1 for the side of Unit 1, and then the side of Unit 4. So it's just got daylight there right now. And that's Unit 4, but I just showed you Unit 4. Underneath that contraption, right, and here's what the contraption originally looked like. Just because it looks like that now don't mean that it's not like that underneath it. Doesn't mean that it's not like that underneath that. And when you have an earthquake there, that's what we're worried about, because this building is actually fragile. Just because they covered it up and you can't see what's going on, it's the same thing applicable for Reactor 3, which is the one behind it. They've done the exact same thing. All right, let's get back to that stuff. A major earthquake rocked the Noto Peninsula. Oh, look at the spammers hit my dirty bastards, eh? The spammers have showed up. Look at this, 56%. Is fusion energy a useless investment and a purposeful distraction from the geothermal that actually exists? Look at the spam, eh? Wow, no one ever does that. That never happens. How did all these people find me to spam me down like that? 27 votes. I got 12 likes. I got 12 likes on my video. I got 27 votes. Let's see if there's already giving me thumbs down on my video. I bet you got no thumbs down on my video. Yeah. Oh dear, look at that. 5 thumbs down on my video. I can't remember the last time I've seen 5 thumbs down on my video. I got 1 thumbs down on that one, 1 thumbs down on that one. Oh, I got 3 on that one. That was a great video, man, yeah. I got 1 down on that one, 3 down on that one. It's extraordinary to have 3 down on my video, by the way. 2. It's extraordinary to have that many thumbs down. It's typically you don't get any, or 1 thumb. There's usually one scumbag out there shows up and gives me a thumbs down and runs away like a coward, right? So to get 5 thumbs down is extraordinary. That is extraordinary. Somebody's butt is hurt. I love it when you do that, eh? That cracks me up. That's my feel-good moment of the day when I see that happening to me. At 28 votes, I got 54% saying no. How is that even possible? Why are they so desperate to do that to me? Sure, I got no views. I got 16 people on my show. Why? I got 13 likes and 28 votes. How is that even possible? Has anybody ever seen that before? Complicated for me. Let's keep rolling here. Major earthquake was an estimated magnitude of 6.4. And you have to be careful when Japan talks about magnitude, or the world's media starts, they always do this with a type of magnitude. But Japan does their scale on the Shindu scale. It's about 10 kilometers deep, 6.5 miles deep. Quake logged a lower 5 on the Jap seismic intensity scale of 7. In the city of Wajima and the town of Shika. The town of Shika is where they got a nuclear power plant on. What power plant down there, Diana? So, which means you got to divide 7 into 10, you get 1.428. 1.43, right? Then multiply that by a lower 5, which on the Japan scale it goes in. So 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 6, or 5, 5.56. And skipping a planet there. So 1.428, multiply it by 5.5. That's a lower, that would be the lower number. Is a 7.8. Well, carry 7 is to the 5 is a 6, and carry 6 to the 8 is 9, so it's a 7.9. Looks like they ran out of accounts, though, to spam me with. I feel bad for them. Take the nuclear industry would have a bunch of extra accounts they can spam me with. Their job is well done. The nuclear trolls only called me 6 times. I blocked their number, but they called me 6 times. Just to interrupt me. Then he spammed that down there. Watch the video, folks. I don't lie. If you're new here, you watch the video. I don't lie. I'll walk you right through all of this stuff. Strong and shallow M6.4. And just because I don't get no views on my videos, it's called censorship. That don't mean people don't watch it. I've been doing this show for over a decade, 5 days a week, typically. I'm pretty busted up lately, so I'm a little all over the place, but we're getting back there. It's a thankless job, right? Per se. I'm doing it for the planet, I'm doing it for the species, and I'm doing it for those who care and their friends and families and their loved ones. It's a stupid amount of work to do what I do every day. It's a stupid amount. Strong and shallow. That's not a good combination for an earthquake in a nuclear wasteland. Earthquake hits near the coast of the Noto Peninsula. And it cracks me up that they're showing you this earthquake on the opposite side of the Noto Peninsula. Right? Because that's the Noto Peninsula. And then the other earthquake was up there in January the 1st, right? Where there's a 3,000, 4,000-year-old fault line ruptured on January the 1st. The Onagawa nuclear reactor, Northeastern Japan, is right there. Which is right up there. Right there. Or is it up right there? I can't remember. And so, when you put them side by side, they had double earthquakes up there. Why did they show that, I wonder today? But there's no reports of an earthquake there. I got no numbers on it or anything like that. But the map is showing both sides of the peninsula, or both sides of Japan, as an earthquake. So there's something going on there we're not aware of, clearly. And I just started this up a couple of days ago. It's been shut down for 13 years. And it's right on the fault lines. It's right alongside of the tectonic plates, which goes bloop every once in a while and causes massive tsunamis and horrific earthquakes, right? 86,000 people have felt the strong shaking. 1.3 million felt moderate shaking. And almost 5 million people felt light shaking. We went 5 million... So you got 5 million, 6 million, over 6 million people feeling shaking. That's a significant earthquake. That is a significant earthquake. And one of the maps here, that's it right there. So look where the earthquake was felt. It wasn't felt up there, though. Hang on, let me show you what I'm talking about. Which is really interesting. Why would... It's not showing any earthquake activity up here. But when you look at the map that they put out, right, it is right there. But when you look at this map, it doesn't show anything up there. It shows it all over here. It's pretty strange, isn't it? But you're talking about 5 million people, 6 million people. Now, the other earthquake was up right there where I'm pointing in January 1st in the Noto, and the damage was unbelievable. So in the January 1st earthquake was a 7.6, and it killed 462 people. It was 440 fatalities in Ishikawa, 4 in Niigata, 2 in Toyama. And the Quake damaged 170,000 structures and injured another 1,300 people. There was 1,500 landslides, and there was over 1,000 aftershocks in January 1st. And so this was a fault line that ruptured after 3,000 or 4,000 years. Now, the Shika nuclear power plant was hit at that time by a 9.8-foot tsunami wave. But the coastline also was lifted up around 13, 14 feet, including the power plant site itself in January 1st. Okay, back to today's story. Oh yeah, they don't make it difficult for something to do. Lying is just, it's so natural for the industry, right? Telling the truth is, you have to waterboard them a couple of hundred times to get them to tell you the truth. Like drown them like a couple of hundred times before they would actually tell you the truth. A strong quake hits Japan, no matter what it is. If you went up and asked the pro-nuclear what time it was, and there was a big clock here, and a big clock there, and another clock right there, and they all said 10 o'clock, they would tell you it was 11 o'clock. That's what their personalities are actually like. And you're like, no, it says 10 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 10 o'clock. They're like, no, it's 11 o'clock. I'm a pro-nuclear. You can trust me. They really are a filthy, degenerate bunch of people, aren't they? Well, if you want to call them people. I don't know how you can call them people. I don't know how you can quantify that assertion. A strong quake / earthquake. Earthquake of 6.2 magnitude strikes Japan's Noto region at a depth of 6.2 miles, 10 kilometers. Magnitude 6.4 magnitude earthquake hit central Japan. It's about a 7.8 on the Shindu. If you take the Shindu scale and convert it, if there's 6 million people felt the shaking, it's bigger than a 6.2. Okay. It was a 7.9 by our proper math. And I showed you how to do that a little earlier. According to the preliminary information, the earthquake occurred at a depth of 10 kilometers and was measured at a lower 5.5 in the Japs seismic intensity scale of 7, Ishikawa Peninsula, prefecture in the Noto Peninsula. A region still recovering from the deadly... Yes, it's still recovering is not the word. NHK's public television said no abnormalities were reported today, at the nuclear power plant on the northern tip of the Noto Peninsula, Shika. 2 oil reactors at the Shika nuclear power plant suffered minor damages, and there was no radiation leaks. Like, that's such a bizarre statement to make. Because the earthquake was on that side of the peninsula. And yet they just had a major one on January 1st. Catastrophic. A 7.7 in the community of Shika itself. The biggest earthquake you can possibly get. They had in the same community as the nuclear power plant. And I don't know about you, but earthquakes that affect 6 million people over a vast area are not going to skirt around. Like, It's not going to ignore the nuclear power plant itself. Like, well, that's we can't have an earthquake over there. Like, go fucking 500 miles that way and 400 miles this way, but don't touch the nuclear plant right alongside of ground zero. How's that work? Anybody know? A magnitude 6.4 earthquake shakes Japan, Noto region. No tsunami danger reported. That's an interesting statement because I don't think the fault line is on that side of the peninsula. And so what happened probably was the earthquake was on the other side, and they're claiming it was on that side to draw attention away from it, right? Because a lot of people moved out of there and said, the hell, you know, before the Noto Peninsula earthquake on January the 1st, they went from having something like 20 earthquakes a year, minor tremors and that, to having something like 20 a day for 2 years almost. And then they had the major one. People should have moved out of there. But they're such dirty people. This earthquake may cause slight changes to sea levels along the coast of the nuclear industry. I'm talking about dirty people. This earthquake may cause slight changes to sea levels along the coast of Japan. There's no expectation of damage. Japan's cabinet office posted on Twitter, now known as X. Like, you're a loser when you can't come out and talk to the public and you post a little post up on Twitter or social networking and that's your fucking statement when 6 million people are affected. That's your statement. You're calling yourself a human, are you? You're truly the most worthless human I've ever come across. Safety checks were conducted at the Shika nuclear power plant, located near the epicenter. Japan's public broadcaster reported minor damage to 2 idled reactors. They confirmed. The Japanese public broadcaster confirmed there was no radiation leak or public danger. Now, how could a public broadcaster who doesn't have access to the site confirm that? How's that actually work, I wonder? You got to take the filthy, despicable, genocidal, omnicidal nuclear industry's word for it, do we? Like, we do a show every day, 5 days a week, I should say, on nuclear lies from the 24-hour news cycle, typically. Or we do nostalgic stories where lies from the nuclear industry. Or we're just talking about the lies from the nuclear industry. It was always about the lies from the nuclear industry every day, the current lies of that day. A strong quake hit Japan's Noto region, but there's no tsunami danger. The Washington Post. Probably the most least trustworthy of all media is out there today. 2 idle reactors at the Shika nuclear power plant suffered minor damages. There was no radiation leak. Where's the picture? You notice in all of these stories, was it a single picture? Not one. Nothing. And the censorship they got on me is so great. Normally you have at least 100 people here because you got an earthquake story. And I probably do, but I only got 15 views, 15 viewers, 15 likes. I got 29 votes. I never seen nothing like that before. I'm batshit crazy industry. A strong quake hit Japan's Noto region, but there's no tsunami danger. This is, just bear with me here. Where am I to? Here we go, I'm there. Oh yeah. There was no danger of a tsunami. How do you know there's no danger of an aftershock that causes a tsunami, I wonder? How can you have such a significant earthquake with no aftershocks? How does that actually work? Off the west coast of the Noto Peninsula, a depth of 10 kilometers, 6.25 miles. This is Nippon, the Japanese mouthpiece themselves in central Japan. A major quake rocked the Noto Peninsula in Ishikawa Prefecture. It wasn't just the Noto Peninsula. It was the Ishikawa and the Niigata prefectures. With an estimate, these are huge areas we're talking about, vast tracts of land. With an estimated magnitude of 6.4, 10 kilometers deep, a seismic intensity of lower 5, the 5th highest on the Jap scale, and the town of Shika, again. And I showed you at the very beginning, Shika on January 1st had a 7.7 earthquake. In fact, AP and Reuters and many medias came out and reported on day 3 that it was a 6.2 or something on the Shindu scale, a 6.5 on the Shindu scale, in the basement of the Shika reactor buildings themselves. You don't get earthquakes in the basements of the buildings. And we've never seen a picture of that community. Like, there was a couple of pictures of straight down the streets and everything was warped. All the telephone poles were laid down. So 5.5 is an actual, by 1.428 is a 7.857. This is 7.9 on the international scale. Strong, shallow. And shallow quakes are some of the worst quakes conceivable. So the Shindu scale should be much higher because it was so shallow. It's extraordinarily shallow, so you get more shaking because it's so shallow, right? And again, why are they showing the earthquake on this side? Right? They got 2 up there, 3 up there, and that one over there. What's going on here? And then you can see they're talking about an earthquake in central Japan, too, on land. And it's just bizarre. Bizarre is normal. This is nuclear industry. Did we go through all this stuff? What the hell is going on here? Yeah, well, that's it for that stuff, I think. That was just a news cycle that came out. And where all the media admits that the Shika nuclear power plant, Noto Peninsula, Ishikawa prefecture, suffered minor damage. What is minor damage at a nuclear disease factory known as a nuclear power plant, I wonder? Spammers are back. Yay, the spammers are back. Look at this, 48%. Oh, no, we got the yes votes is going up. I'm sorry. It's hard to see on my little screen over here, but when it comes up on the big screen. Way to go, guys. Girls. That's crazy, though, to have those type of votes. I've never seen. When was the last time we seen that type of votes? A couple of years ago? 4 years ago? 5 years ago? The International Degenerate Agency assesses operational safety at the Hungary's Paks nuclear disease factory, surrounded by farms. An International Atomic Energy mission team. They don't go to Fukushima prefecture and go to those communities I showed you earlier, do they? The International Atomic Energy Agency mission team doesn't tell you that the radioactive fallout from the reactors is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. They don't tell you that, do they? Like explosions going off in your DNA and your cells and your chromosomes. And permanent, right? Permanent explosions every second inside your body, the birds, the insects, the trees, the animals. If you're wondering where all the species are gone, look no further than you can trace the direct decline of the species to the nuclear open testing, to the nuclear dumping, and 80 years of emissions, and then the pulse event from Fukushima was the straw that broke the planet's back. So the existing 4 units, reactors, started up between 1982 and 1987 at the Paks nuclear plant and produced half the country's electricity. The design lifetime was 30 years. It was extended in 2005 by another 20 years, between 2032 and 2037. and they're planning on extending it again for 20 more years. The reason it was supposed to be closed down in 30 years was because of the neutron bombardment. It makes everything brittle. And because they're high-pressure reactors, 1,000, 1,200 pounds per square inch, the last thing you want is fatigued metal containing it, right? Because when that goes, baby, that's big deal. Japan picked up 30 million one-ton bags before they gave up and said, the hell with it, we don't care anymore. Chalk River, this was an important story I didn't cover last night. So I got this up front and center. Chalk River Nuclear Waste Facility challenged in court again. It's right on the Ottawa River. This goes right down to the capital of Canada. Then it ends up down where I'm to in the Atlantic. This got hundreds and hundreds of buildings there. And they're putting a dump, well, they got a dump there. Construction of a radioactive waste mount on the surface near the Ottawa River was challenged in federal court last week. The contentious project would allow Canadian nuclear laboratories, we often describe them as Chalk River National Laboratories, they're ran by American companies, they're owned by the Canadian government allegedly, to permanently dispose of 1 million cubic meters, 1 million tons of radioactive waste from nuclear meltdowns and everything else. Permanently dispose of 1 million cubic meters of radioactive waste in a shallow mount at the surface, where they have huge snowfalls, huge rainfalls in that area too. And everything is straight downhill, which is not very far away, which goes right down to the Great Lakes, the third biggest aquifer on the entire planet. And that deep geological repository is kept on the sub because it's so toxic, and they just put it in a big pile and said, go after yourselves worldwide. Canada's truly one of the worst when it comes to nuclear. They're just disgusting people. I know, I'm Canadian, right? And the majority of Canadians, if they understood this was going on, they would go up and deal with these people, I can tell you that much. 190 kilometers northwest of Ottawa, as a solution to radioactive waste accumulated since the 1940s. A lot of this stuff they were doing then was given to the Manhattan Project. So we're talking about absurd toxicity, as well as waste from future operations. The mount would be known as the Near Surface Disposal Facility. Like calling it these acronyms, Near Surface Disposal Facilities, it's you put all your waste in a pit and then you threw dirt on top of it. Literally the worst conceivable way to deal with it. Literally, figuratively speaking. It's truly the worst thing you could have done. You're guaranteed to contaminate the river right alongside of it and millions of people downstream forever. And who knows, really, who knows what they've dumped into that in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. Who really knows? Because this is a national laboratory. They have 2 meltdowns there on top of that. Where do you think all that got washed to? Right down into that, right? You know I'm right. They have so much hate for us. They have so much contempt for everybody. They think of themselves as gods, eh? And that nothing matters as long as they're happy and their children don't find out how evil they actually are. That's all that matters to them. We're not here today to argue about whether or not we need a nuclear waste facility. Well, if you got 1 million tons of it, you definitely need a nuclear waste facility. And you don't want to put it where it goes straight into the Great Lakes, my goodness. And the reality is there is nuclear waste at Chalk River. There's 1 million tons they're talking about that they acknowledge. And it needs to be handled as safely as possible. Putting it in a hole in the ground and throwing dirt on it is not safe and nowhere near as safe as possible. Nowhere in the realm as safe as possible. Not even the same dimension. But the Canadian National Laboratories and the Commission have cut some corners. They cut every corner. They're just worthless humans. They look like humans, but they don't have any of the attributes, do they? It would not be a big deal if we were talking about the compost heap, but this is not compost. Nicholas Pope, the lawyer representing the group, who most likely doesn't understand the nuances that if you're here regularly that you do. And are not able to articulate the incredible dangers properly to a jury, for instance, or a judge or an arbiter. It's simply people like me need to be brought into these conversations desperately so we can have a lucid conversation and so that we can get rid of the problem makers and bring in people that want to cause solutions, come up with solutions. The application says the Commission's decision is unreasonable in 3 key ways. Oh, it's more than 3 ways, and more than 3 key ways, but the Commission used the wrong radiation dose limits for exposures. Actually, the numbers are based on bananas and potato chips. They're not even based upon anthropogenic man-made radiation. The International Atomic Energy Agency admits that after Fukushima in a rare, weak point, I guess. Another point, key point states Canadian National Laboratories, Chalk River, didn't provide all the legally required information, including the origins of the packaged radioactive waste destined for the facility. Nobody knows what they're putting there, in other words. These are certainly all valid points, but there's a lot important things about this that needs to be included. And lastly, the applicants argued the Commission didn't meaningfully grapple with the project's cumulative effects, inadequate waste verifications impact to the species at risk. Oh, they know what's going down. There's no way they're going to have that conversation. They don't want you to think about those facets. All the fuel they're talking about, all the waste, a lot of the waste they're putting there is still splitting atoms forever. It's one of the worst lectures concoctions conceivable for anything with replicating cells, for everything with replicating cells. Canadian nuclear laboratories contain over 300 buildings, over 3,700 hectare plot of land along the Ottawa River. All of these disease factories are right along the biggest aquifers on the planet. Today, the site remains operated through contractors like C&L. Well, Canadian Nuclear Laboratories is just the name of the site. The operators are actually some of the big names in the nuclear industry, none of them from Canada. In 2014, Ontario became the first jurisdiction in North America to leave behind the coal-fired power plants and fully rely on nuclear power. Ontario. In fact, a couple of years ago, they canceled 700 wind and solar projects, huge facilities, canceled them because they were competing with nuclear and then announced that they were going to build more nuclear because they didn't have enough energy. 700 large-scale wind and solar sites in Ontario were canceled. They wouldn't take the power from them anymore, and they wouldn't give them any incentives to expand or to build or anything else like that. The renewable energies, all of them, except for a handful of themselves, I'm sure, were canceled in Ontario. 2 or 3 years ago, we covered that extensively when it happened. In 2016, a $1.2 billion investment plan over 10 years was released by the Government of Canada. The investment plan required the decommissioning of 120 facilities at the Chalk River site, at the Canadian National Laboratory site. The consortium chosen to run the Canadian nuclear laboratories, I went hunting, looking for it. Fluor was one of them. They're a military-industrial complex, for goodness sakes, running the Canadian National Laboratory. I mean, if you look at their legacy from Hanford, where Fluor dumped 450 billion gallons directly into the soil in the 50s and the 60s. That's equal to a 6-foot-wide aquarium of nuclear waste, 518 feet tall, wrapped around the entire planet. You really think that that same organization won't do the same thing here in Canada for 1 second? And that's just one of the many things that they got done there. It was equal, like there's 177 tanks in Hanford. They buried in the ground, they put all this legacy waste into it. But they actually dumped 1.4 million of those 300,000 gallon tanks directly into the soil. They're like, no, we got 177 tanks there we're worried about. Yeah, but you dumped 1.4 million of those same tanks, 300,000 gallon super tanks, directly into the soil. An energy solution. And that's headquartered in Salt Lake City, Utah, one of the largest processors of waste in America. It is also one of the world's largest nuclear waste processors. It's also got a big toehold over in UK. The least trustworthy people on the planet. That's what he put in charge. In June 27, the company took over operations management of several Magnox atomic plants from the British nuclear fuel. British nuclear fuel, man. Their legacy is so hideous, so monstrous. It's unbelievable what this stupid industry got done to everybody and every species on the planet. Like the cancer epidemic started in the 70s after all that nuclear testing. It's a nuclear war. It's the same bombs, the same radioactive fallout. And they done it to themselves because they didn't want Russia to do it to them, or Russia didn't want them to do it to them, or China done it to themselves because they were worried Pakistan might do it to them. Pakistan done it to themselves because they were worried China might do it to them. Blow up nuclear weapons in their country. Britain went to Australia and blew the shit out of Australia. Contaminated all Australia with radioactive fallout because they didn't want to contaminate all of Britain with radioactive fallout. Like Maralinga, Montebello. What they done in those places, and Edmondsfield and the rest of it, is absurd. They even detonated over 700 dirty bombs in the deserts. They waited for the wind to blow across the populated areas and the food belts too, right? The food, the bread baskets of those countries. Data center boom fuels demand for nuclear disease factories. So again, here we are again, right? Like 2 weeks ago, investors lost their shirts because Google, Amazon, Meta, who were going to use small modular reactors, were denied by the regulatory agencies. And the week before that, they come out and announced they were going to do it. And a week later, the regulatory said, no, you're not. And so all the investors that were sucked into that vortex, the vortex of deceit and dishonesty and deception, were annihilated for their life savings. But Google, all the people in the nuclear industry knows that's what's going to happen. So they sell their shares. When the stocks go up, they'll sell all their shares. And 2 weeks later, not 2 weeks later, but a week later, when it crashes, when it's finally crashed, all the crying is over with. A week later, they'll come in and buy up all those stocks that they sold for top dollar for dirt cheap and rinse and repeat every 2 or 3 weeks. Now they're started again. What? And we're seeing the same thing with fusion energy. The exact same thing. And I covered it extensively last night, that narrative. Is fusion energy a useless investment? Of course it is. And a purposeful distraction from geothermal that actually exists. Yes. Geothermal is about $5 million per megawatt. If you took all the money that you already dumped into fusion worldwide, particularly the last number of years, with 100 fusion companies starting up just to milk the system, you had enough to buy geothermal for the entire planet. And you'll never get fusion, because fusion only works in the solar system because it can eject masses of millions of miles into space. You can't do that in a bottle, right? Like a nuclear site. No, it's a distraction, but fusion is meant to destroy the investors, to steal the money from millions and millions of investors, the same as the small modular reactors is. That's Amazon's data center right there. But when you think about how much business Amazon does worldwide, on top of that, right? It's extraordinary, isn't it? So do you expect something like this? The military has 500 of these sites, for goodness sakes. Who's your biggest enemy on this planet? Is the militaries. For example, recent projects include Amazon's funding of 4 small modular reactors. Well, there is no small modular reactors. They actually don't exist. Just because you're invoking them don't mean that they exist. The world is a vampire, and the nuclear industry is right at the top of that chain. Google agreed with Cairo Power to develop small modular reactors. Microsoft is going to get 3 Mile Island. They say, these are absurd. This is just meant to trick investors into investing in it. But here's the reality of their small modular reactors. Canada is going to build small modular reactors, right? This was from a few days ago. The building's going to be 35 meters up and 38 meters below the ground. It's going to be 270 feet, the reality of it is. 73 meters. 240 feet, 24-story building. 24-story buildings. When you compare it to Japan, these factories, they were 19-story buildings. There's nothing left of it. Whatever's left to it is just a big mangled mess of a nightmare that the world doesn't need. So the current small modular reactors in Canada are so big, they're bigger than a lot of skyscrapers in Canada. If you build it above ground, it's 24 stories. Just because you put 11, 12 stories underground don't mean it's not 24 stories total. How can you call that a modular reactor? How are you going to take that apart and put it on a transport truck and ship it somewhere? You're not. That's a permanent. That's the animosity equivalent of a large nuclear reactor somewhere on the planet for sure. The inside story of Google's quiet nuclear quest. For a decade, Google researchers, now you can see why I'm censored so much, because Google is pro-nuclear, right? So we restored some balance here. I got 58% yes. Well, we got spammed heavily. That was incredible spamming. I missed it all. Bless everybody that made that happen. Thank you so much for restoring some semblance of reality. In 2014, he said he went on to my managers with an audacious proposal. Let's create a nuclear energy research and development group at Google. Well, Google is a corporate personhood, so it doesn't pay federal, state, local taxes. It takes that money and puts it in an offshore account. And so if it gets a penalty, because it can't be arrested as a corporate personhood, it can't be sent to jail. Like Mark Zuckerberg can't go to jail. His company's a corporate personhood. You can't send all the shareholders to jail. So the company gets a fine. So they don't care about that. They put all their state, federal, local taxes in offshore accounts, grows interest on it. And when they get $1 billion fine or $100 million fine, they just take a little tiny fraction of the money they didn't pay for taxes and pay the fine. We call it a kickback, don't we? The most dishonest, deceitful. And then they censor everybody. They don't pay any taxes, state, federal, local. And then they censor everybody that's got a soul or a moral compass or anything like that. Well, you can't have that. You got a moral compass. Censor that guy. Put him into an algorithm so he never shows up anywhere. And Google's work on fusion. Well, it's a tax write-off. They still get their tax write-offs, but they don't pay any federal, state, or local taxes anyway. They can still get, per se, a tax write-off. So they'll get the money back for it, in other words. They rob all the taxpayers, state, federal, and locally. Then they'll submit the money they spent on the fusion, and the taxpayers got to pay that to Google, even though Google pays all their money, puts all their money in offshore accounts. They're the worst humans conceivable, and now they have destroyed everybody's future because they're not even rational. They're completely dishonest. Is nuclear power renewable or non-renewable? non-renewable. It's disgusting. Let me see. Are you ready to delve into the complex world of disease factories / nuclear power? Once considered a clean source of energy, that's because people didn't know the truth. Once you take the fuel out of the reactor to put some after 14 months and put it in a fuel pool, it's still splitting atoms to power a million homes, except it's no longer in a containment. Those atoms now are released directly into the biosphere through evaporation, where it boils off about 120,000 liters of water for each fuel pool. Each liter is going to be just hideous, a monstrous amounts of anthropogenic, lethal man-made isotopes like plutonium and curium that attacks everything with replicating cells. Lethal to everything with replicating cells. We have nothing. There's nothing on the planet, no species whatsoever on the planet has an autoimmune trigger to defend against anthropogenic man-made radioactive fallout. And this is your problem with nuclear waste. All nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging radiation. Nuclear waste can release radioactive decay, which poses health risk to humans and wildlife alike. So that's the closest to the truth I think we've seen forever, in a decade, is that statement right there. But all reactor fuel pools have no containments. It's still splitting atoms as it would normally power millions of homes and businesses, and that those atoms now are released directly into the environment. And how many atoms do you got to split to boil a glass of water? I can tell you one thing, it's an absurd amount. Now multiply that each minute to boil water for a million homes and businesses. Multiply that by 1,440 minutes a day. Not only that, the water that it does boil, like salt water, would normally have 1 billion creatures into it. You're going to boil every one of them too. That's the eggs, the larvae, the small fries included. And 100 million of them or so per glass of water per minute. There's 4,500 tons. Like 4,500 one-ton pickup trucks driving past you every minute. That's how much is going to each reactor. Try wrapping your mind around that statement. We must transition to a cleaner source that does not come at the expenses of the human health and the environment. And they're talking about nuclear. Good for these people. Good job. Well done. Nano nuclear stock melts after announcing a 60 million private placement. In other words, the people that already had stocks, they're going to lose, their stocks are going to get devalued because they're printing money now. They're printing another 5 million shares that are $24, $26 each. So if you own stocks in a company that doesn't have a product, there's no such thing as these small modular reactor. You got better chances of finding a fucking leprechaun when you open up your kitchen drawer than you were of seeing a small modular reactor in the next 50 years. You got a better chance to get hit by a Soviet satellite in the next 3 seconds. 2, 1. I can't see you. Are you still there? Did you get hit by a Soviet satellite? No, Dana. The second fundraise in a month on top of that. They all want a big Christmas. They want to take their families on expensive cruises. They want to rent out, 100 feet yachts and take their children and their friends and families out there and pretend that they're great. They want to buy their kids Lamborghinis and send them to Harvard. They need that money. And if they got to rob every investor on the planet to get it, they'll do it at the drop of a hat. They won't even hesitate for a second. Like, woo! It's time, baby. I'm going to significantly augment its cash on hand. Of course it is. Well, you need cash for. You're not trying to build a reactor. You haven't got land to build a reactor. You don't have an application into the regulatory agency to even conceive of building the reactors. What do you need all that money for? Why sell all those shares when no one's going to get their money back on those shares? They're going to lose the money. They're going to lose their money. And eventually they're going to cash in the shares because they lost the shares of... And the ones that know that sold their shares right away. That's why there was a big 18% drop, right? These are professional Ponzi schemes. Every 2 weeks, rinse and repeat, right? This is fun. Ultra-safe nuclear reactors. It's ultra-safe. They went bankrupt too, right? They don't have a license or not. They don't have the application ready, the license, to go to the regulatory agency. They're the furthest thing from it. Your kid is quicker, if your kid started right now to put an application for a small modular reactor into the regulatory agency, it would get them in there first. Your kid would get them in there before ultra-safe nuclear did. They wait the regulatory nod, rubber stamp in other words, the regulatory rubber stamp. They got a big building because investors are, when it comes to nuclear, investors are a dime a dozen, aren't they? They're lulled into it, and next thing you know, they got no money. Their life savings are gone. They worked all their lives. Nuclear industry is out pimping. Is closely monitoring the Ultra-Safe Nuclear Corp's progress in securing U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission's approval for a micro-modular nuclear reactor. Well, Ultra-Safe Nuclear just a couple of weeks ago had hit rock bottom, so the media now is going to come up and put them on a pedestal to try to get investors to buy into the stocks again. That's all this is about. So they can cash in their stocks that are worthless and make a few bucks on it before Christmas. Like they do every year. Has significantly advanced their partnership in the Philippines. Yeah, they're going after the Filipinos because nobody in North America is going to buy their stocks anymore. NuScale done the exact same thing when they went bottom up, right? They went down to South Korea and sold all kinds of shares. So this is a worthless. The people in this industry are just worthless. That's the best way to describe it. It's the only way to describe them, isn't it? But Ultra-Safe Nuclear, they used to call me up too. A few years back. It was in the summertime. They were calling me every couple of days too. Tormenting me. Because I was ditching on them, right? It's a new technology that doesn't exist. It's not a new technology. You don't have an application into the regulatory agency. You got to build a reactor at some point at one of the national laboratories because that's the only spot you're allowed to build it. And you got to get the kinks out of it for a decade. You have to resubmit it back to the regulatory agencies and modifications, build a new reactor that doesn't have all the flaws that the original one had in it. You're decades and decades before anything can come to fruition, but they're not even going to try to build it. It's all posturing to make it look good to the stock market. So the stock market, not that the stock market cares, they'll pump it out there anyway. They know what's up. They're buying shares in this and then dumping them 2 weeks later once they go up. Paducah Mayor Bray appointed to the Kentucky Nuclear Energy Development Authority. Small modular reactors. There's some push on that, isn't it? Because the stocks nosedived everywhere a couple of weeks ago. Now they got to pump it back up again with new investors. And then all of a sudden when it takes off because they hit the right note, then everybody will cash in and then it'll crash the next day, right? It's what they do every 2 or 3 weeks without fail for 13 years straight. That's the routine. It's never changed. And the regulatory agencies are just happy to make that happen every 2 weeks because they're doing the same thing, aren't they? Their wives and kids are getting stocks and then taken back to mom, pa, kettle. State agency aims to, that's another big paycheck for them, right? Implement nuclear technology in Kentucky. Kentucky happens to be a perfect spot for geothermal. And will serve until November 19th, 2028. Rethinking nuclear power as a clean energy source. All of this stuff we're seeing the last number of days is about promoting the stocks, right? Tricking the investors. The investors will get, every one of them will get this. Countries worldwide are embracing nuclear energy for its low emissions, reliable supplies. Like, what are you talking about? Really, like, what are you talking about? As they seek a solution to the climate crisis, they say it over and over and over. has no science behind this whatsoever. Amidst fears surrounding climate change, as the world seeks solutions to climate change, to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, the worst emissions on the planet is the nuclear industry. Here's 20 days after Fukushima of Neptunium-239, covering the entire planet, which decays, by the way, to 239 of plutonium. Oh, by the way, here's a 239. This is 20 days of radioactive fallout from Japan of plutonium, covering the entire planet in a visible plume. You can't see it or smell it or hear it or feel it or taste it or touch it or pick it up or throw rocks at it. You can't perceive it. I got a big ass pillow behind me. That's helping. It could be the painkillers. Who knows for sure? Something's helping. The pillow and the painkillers, no doubt. Let me tell you about it. First off, this is plutonium study. This is a plutonium plume. This is a study by the American Navy, Loveless Respiratory Research Institute in New Mexico. It's 144 beagle dogs and beagle puppies. They're in one single monodispersal inhalation of plutonium. It's a very small amount. Death from radiation occurred 1.5 to 5.4 years after exposure. It shows, and it manifested, it seems like pneumonia or something, right? Tumors of the lungs, the skeleton, the liver occurred beginning about 3 years after exposures. So 3 tumors in each animal from plutonium, a single inhalation of the beagle dogs, with the big, beautiful, wonderful dogs. It's very unusual to see a mean beagle. That's why they use them in the experiments, because they're less likely to get bit. Bone tumors, 93 dogs, were the most common cause of death. Skeleton tumors from mutated stem cells, right? For all the species that are affected by this invisible plume. Liver tumors in 46 dogs were the second most common cause of death. Does it sound familiar to anybody? Are you seeing a lot of bone tumors and liver tumors and lung tumors lately, last number of years? You don't suppose? And by the way, the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods is actually curium isotopes. So this is by the same organization, Loveless Respiratory Research Institute, and Dr. Raymond Gilmedi was one of the lead authors of these disgusting genocidal machines. Curium isotopes are a major byproduct in the irradiated nuclear fuel. So if you take all the gammas, all the alphas, all the betas, all the neutrons, curium is the biggest byproduct. Excuse the fact that they're talking about alpha emitting because it's an alpha emitter. They're the biggest byproduct. And curium isotopes need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. You know, the plume that's covering the planet from Fukushima. That there's nobody on the planet didn't breathe that in, I can guarantee it. No insect, no bird, no animal, no mammal, no child, no human. And it was discovered that human kidneys are 50 times less efficient than the animal kidneys at removing plutonium. So humans are 50 times more likely to have these adverse effects, you know, death of every one of them, than the animal was. And the animals, every one of them died in the studies, right? And if you don't take that serious, then that's on you. Guam radiation survivors plead for assistance. Like everybody else, been poisoned by the open testing. Even the underground testing was all vented straight into the atmosphere at hundreds of thousands of miles per hour. Like, it's much worse than that. It's not like like those underground caverns that were created, they're incredibly radioactive for thousands of years. So every time rain egresses into them places, you're destroying the water tables worldwide. Radiation survivors living on Guam are pleading for the U.S. government to add them to a compensation scheme. Like, unless you work for the industry, you're not getting anything. If you're a victim, they were giving people money to go get radiation therapy, which is if you watch my program from last night, where I showed probably 30 studies on why you don't want to do that. They give them like $50,000, and almost all of it ends up going to radiation therapy for all the cancers they got. And then they die because like radiation and chemotherapy, I got a little video of a doctor talking about all the autopsies he does on cancer patients. Let me play it for you. I'm not going to say entertaining. It's a short video, but you got to hear it yourself sometimes. I'm going to put my extra head on. I'm going to adjust the volume for you in real time, so bear with me.
Everything I've seen.
Okay, that's pretty loud.
In all the autopsies I've done of cancer patients, not one of them died of cancer. They died of liver failure, they died of cardiac failure, renal failure, all due to chemotherapy. We got a patient that had been through chemo and radiation, and they had cooked her liver and cooked her kidneys. We looked at the blood work and realized she had no organ function to speak of left. And I said, we can make her more comfortable, but the radiation treatment that they used on her has actually destroyed her organs. So we did what we could. She'd been given 3 weeks, we gave her 6 months. And she got time to say goodbye to her family. But I remember walking into the office the morning after she passed, and this internist was sitting on the waiting room couch. And I said, what's the problem? And she looked at me and she said, I'm doing the death certificate, and I don't know what to write for cause of death. I said, you might try writing the truth for a change. And she said, you know how much trouble I can get in by doing that? I said, if you're going to study with me, you're going to write the truth. And she wrote radiation poisoning, cause of death. She's the only doctor I've ever seen do that. She actually had the courage to tell the truth.
That cause of death was radiation poisoning. Cooks the liver, all the organs. If you don't believe that, go read up on those dog studies. Come to your senses about what's really going on here. And don't forget, the biggest byproduct is curium. And you need lead shielding 20 times thicker for curium isotopes than you do for the plutonium isotopes. 20 times thicker. And look at the adverse effects from plutonium. And remember, human kidneys are 50 times less efficient. You're 50 times more vulnerable than the dog. You're 50 times more likely to die than the dog. And every dog died from the plutonium. But the biggest byproduct of the fuel rods isn't plutonium, unfortunately. It's the curium isotopes. Promoting fusion energy leadership with the U.S. Tritium Production Capacities. As a fusion energy future becomes increasingly tangible. Really? How do you figure that? A single commercial scale fusion reactor will require more tritium fuel than is currently available from the entire planet's civilian use inventories. A single fusion reactor for 1 year is around 56 kilograms. Before the cycle of net tritium gain can begin, however, the world needs sufficient tritium to complete. and successful commission first of its kind fusion reactors. You can't build a reactor without the fuel, and if there's zero possibility you're going to get that fuel. The United States has the only proven scalable tritium production supply chain, but it's reserved for nuclear weapons, because when you add it to the nuclear weapon, you can increase the explosion power 4, 10, 20, 100 times. The more tritium, the more explosive the nuclear weapon is. The plutonium weapon is. Isn't that interesting? Fusion energy currently relies on limited reserves of tritium from non-scalable production streams. The reserves, and this story is incredibly interesting, by the way. These reserves reduced by 5% each year due to radioactivity decay, which makes stockpiling difficult. One estimate suggests the global stocks of civilian-use tritium are just 25 to 30 kilograms. And the largest source of civilian-use tritium is in Canada with the CANDU reactors. And the evidence is very strong that the CANDU reactors, which are hideous, were created specifically to make the tritium for the thermonuclear weapons. And then you can't contain tritium, right? Canada's release of tritium into the environment are the worst nightmare conceivable. Most of the material is intended to fuel the International Thermonuclear Experiment Reactor in the next decade from the Canadian, if that's to be believed. A lot of it's going to the weapons facilities in the United Kingdom and United States and France. This tritium production is directly coupled to the power generation rate of its fleet of Canadian CANDU reactors. Therefore, the only way to increase the tritium production rates is to build more CANDU power reactors. Think about that statement. And now recently, about a month ago, they announced they were going to build more. I can't remember which country it was. Was it Poland or Georgia or something? They can't fund it themselves. We'll have to fund it for them. But it's okay because we need the tritium for the weapons anyway, and for the fabled fusion experiments. And that's where all your precious metals are going to too, by the way. Nothing for humanity, everything for the nuclear, right? What's also interesting was the Tennessee Valley Authority will produce up to 4 kilograms of tritium over the next fuel cycles. It's just like 14 months or so, 18-month cycle in that particular reactor. For the Watts-Bar nuclear reactors. And they got two there. The other one that came online took 40 years. 42 years or whatever. But it wasn't about power. It was about tritium for their thermonuclear weapons, because you have to replace it all the time because you can't contain it. And this would exceed the current combined 2.8 kilogram production goal, which would be further outstripped if the reactors were operated at their maximum licensed limit. And this is why, because a lot of reactors are going offline, what they're doing is increasing the production of the reactors, the output of the reactors, which are high-pressure reactors and that are very brittle from the Wigner effect from decades of gamma shines and alpha and neutron and beta and X-rays and everything else. This is why they typically had a 30-year life, because they knew this was a catastrophic effect. If the reactors were operated at their maximum licensing limit, producing 4.7 kilograms of tritium. Well, ain't this some interesting stuff? All of this tritium is designated for military use from Watts-Bar. They're not running it hard to power your communities, your cities. They're running it hard to make as much tritium. And when you have it, the amount you're talking about is not very much. The National Nuclear Security Administration Strategic Integrated Roadmap highlights the goal to demonstrate enhanced tritium production capabilities for 2025, which is coded as a nuclear deterrent. So running the reactors in your communities at high capacity that are already fragile and brittle from decades of neutron bombardments is acceptable because it's part of the nuclear deterrent. All you need to pretend you got the nuclear weapons to have the deterrent. Right? Iran doesn't need a nuclear weapon. They just got to say we got one. And that's enough to deter the vultures and the warhawks. Repurposing valuable tritium from decommissioned warheads is another routine they're doing. Thermonuclear warheads, obviously. And tritium itself, sufficiency was seen as one of the major near-term challenges by a slim margin. The major challenge after 2030. Supply chain partners know that tritium is one, which is 3H, by the way, which they very rarely talk about, is one of the top 3 constraints to scalability, which is not natural. It's anthropogenic, man-made. Until humanity can mine the vast quantities of helium-3 on the moon, like the truth, when the truth starts to come out, you realize we're not even an insect to this industry. They think of us as insects. They treat us like insects, and they despise us as if we were insects too. One of the only terrestrial sources of this material is from the tritium decay process. So at a tritium decay, you can get helium-3. Operating at 1 gigawatt, a lousy 1 gigawatt, fusion reactor for a year will require more than 55 kilograms of tritium. The total reserves worldwide are 25 to 30 kilograms. In order to produce the numbers they need, they have to poison everybody on the planet all day, all on, forever. The National Ignition Facility at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in 2022, we covered that, where they, just before Christmas, they said they got fusion. And then they couldn't reproduce it, could they? And then all the investors came on board magically just before Christmas, and everybody had a wonderful Christmas in the nuclear industry. It was amazing. And they got all kinds of resources. Look at the resources they got at their fingertips. They got all the money in the world, they still can't bring it to fruition. Because it's not about that. If you bring it to fruition, there's no money to be made. The money's in the siphoning and the leaching and the parasitic routines that they are accustomed to. Their parents were parasites, their parents were parasites, their parents were parasites, and their children will be parasites. The U.S. government produces tritium at Watts Bar at a premium of $50,000 a gram. $50,000, which means you need, you're talking about $2.5 billion just to run the reactors for a year. The Canadian tritium is $300 a gram, or $30,000 a gram, sorry. They need to address any uncertainties, unknowns regarding the radiological risk posed by tritium. Listen, they studied anthropogenic man-made elements 1 million times more than the natural elements of the solar system, or more than that, probably. According to what we got, the documentation that we can provide. Being a scumbag is the only thing they're actually good at. And man, are they ever good at that. They're the best of the best at being scumbags. They're the best of the best of the best. And how's our poll do tonight? Here somewhere. Is fusion energy a useless investment and purposeful distraction from geothermal that actually exists? I think it's a fair assessment to say yes. We got spammed there earlier big time, eh? There's incredible spamming. They had a picnic spamming me today. Singapore urged to avoid being a test bed for small modular reactors. There's people in the nuclear industry in a closet sucking their thumb going, this is not happening, this is not happening. Way to go, Singapore. And then they talk about small modular reactors like the academic in Russia, the first floating one. Does that look like a small modular reactor, anybody? You think you're going to fit that on the back of a 1-ton pickup truck? It's 10 stories tall. It's probably just as much underground, if I remember correctly, underwater. They're massive machines. The only thing we can count on is the nuclear industry is disgusting. Protesters vow to shut down XL Monticello nuclear reactor, which hemorrhaged, and they said only tritium, right, into the Mississippi River. And they kept it secret for 3 months. And then 3 months later, they had all kinds of pavilions, all kinds of shops set up in the community to feed them propaganda. And then the media came out and said, well, there was a leak. It was like a 1.2 million liters, was it, or something like that? That's not a leak. 1.2 million is not a leak. A leak is like when your tire goes flat over a week. That's a leak. 1.2 million liters is a catastrophic event. And then they try to say, and they got away with it, no dissenting voices are allowed. And only the control opposition will show up. And the control opposition sure showed up for this one, didn't they? Let me see. What do we got here? John LaForge. Now, I sent LaForge pictures of Fukushima's melted reactors, and he chose to ignore it. A long-time activist with Nuke Watch. And Nuke Watch has refused to acknowledge that Fukushima had lost the fuel pools, even today. The control opposition like him and Arnie Gunnarsson and Helen Caldicott, that's what the locals are going to be fed. And all he's going to talk about is tritium. Spoke about the dangerous radioactive leaks. Like the numbers we're talking about is media information. John LaForge is misinformation, right? About the radioactive tritium. So you got the real people there that are trying to make a change, and people like John LaForge and Arnie Gunnarsson will show up with all kinds of money, all kinds of resources, give you a pat on the back, and then they'll get on the microphone and they'll start screaming about tritium. They're the worst humans conceivable. And I sent John LaForge all the information, all kinds of headlines, and he refused to acknowledge it. Same as Arnie Gunnarsson, who said the fuel was in the pool of Reactor 4. Why are these people not challenged? Why are they allowed to be so evil? Why do we let them vomit all over us? The most powerful fuel in history follows Hawkins' predictions. 8 grams for 1 million miles. They're talking about thorium. 233, right? Converting into uranium-233, which is a fission product, hitting with neutrons, right? So it's quite deceptive. It's incredibly dishonest, is what they're doing with that story. British Energy could absorb the government's nuclear agencies. Every year, Britain comes out with another agency that, because the other agencies took a couple of $1 billion, didn't do anything on the party. They were useless, so they got creates another agency. Then he creates another. The Great British Nuclear is supposed to be the next renaissance for the nuclear industry, and they're going to do the exact same thing. They're going to absorb everything, just put them all under the one wing because they can't keep funding them all separately. NASA is going to send a nuclear-powered drone to Saturn's moon Titan. And so the nuclearproctologist.org, my organization, is anti-space, putting nuclear in anthropogenic man-made nuclear. We call it anthropogenic man-made nuclear because it's not created by the solar system. It's not created by the sun. These elements are unique. And there's nothing on this planet that has an autoimmune trigger to defend against it because it's not from the solar system. We don't create this stuff. So sending nuclear into space, introducing an element into space, is completely, there's no need to do it. And the people that are doing it, a lot of these rockets blow up, right? I'm going to go up and fly around and enrich humanity. Well, it's not. It never will. Never does. Never have. It enriched everybody at NASA, and that was it. Who sold you a fable about the moon? Nuclear wins as the best alternative energy source. And this is motley fools. And all they do is promote uranium stocks. So they had a poll, and there was wind and solar and geothermal, and people didn't want that. No, all they wanted was nuclear. So buy nuclear stocks. How is that not disgusting? Gain access to breaking stock news. Motley Fools only promotes uranium stocks. They done a poll. In November, Seeking Alpha, I'm sorry, not Motley Fools, there's two of them, Seeking Alphas and Motley Fools. Wall Street Breakfast subscribers, Wall Street Breakfast. We're asked to identify the most realistic alternative energy source in the United States. Choices given were wind, solar, nuclear, geothermal, hydropower, but only one clear winner emerged. 73% of the votes were for more nuclear. And all of them got stocks in nuclear, no doubt. I mean, really, the most lowest forms of life imaginable. This is what Google puts up on the front pages of the news cycle. Case made for small modular reactors built underground to protect from military and natural threats. Military and natural threats. There's all kinds of nuclear reactors that are already out there. They don't need to attack the small modular ones. They can attack all the nuclear dump sites they want to, let alone the nuclear sites. There's no air defenses at the nuclear sites. So to invoke a military, and there's a bigger threat by putting it underground, especially from earthquakes and floods. And we are living now post-Fukushima in a time of floods and adverse conditions, aren't we? Being a scumbag is all they're good at. This new Rolls-Royce office to enhance UK nuclear engineering capabilities. No, they want to going to get 100 jobs for the nuclear military industrial complex. So what? Rolls-Royce office. Rolls-Royce is going to build a small modular reactor, they said. And the British government gave them like $500 million. They didn't put any of their own money into it. And then about 6 months later, they had their hand out again. It was just a shakedown. And their small modular reactor was a massive reactor. It had nothing to do with small. Almost half a gigawatt. Iran announces enrichment expansion in response to the International Atomic Energy Agency. And you got dickhead Rafael Grossi, one of the worst humans we ever created. He's a worthless piece of shit, isn't he? Kenya moves forward. Kenya can't even manage their sewage. Kenya can't manage the diapers in the community. You go walk through the community, there's diapers on the ground everywhere. Kenya can't even provide fresh water, and they're going to put nuclear in their country. The U.S. is on the cusp of a nuclear renaissance. They're terrified of the waste. They don't understand that the waste is splitting atoms. If they understood that, no one would live within 1,000 miles of a nuclear power plant. The global nuclear moment, a versatile energy source for net zero. What I should start selling is punching bags that look like nuclear scientists. I'd probably make a fortune in the near future, right? Big tech fuels regular nuclear resurgence with small modular reactor. Again, this like the pump to push out this narrative when small modular reactor stocks just crashed again 2 weeks ago. is meant to pump up those stocks, right? So investors who don't know anything about the industry, because it's a very difficult industry to learn anything about, will be lulled into complacency, buy the stocks. In 2 weeks, they lost their life savings. 50 years in a factory, gone. To the despicable, disgusting, parasitic nuclear industry is the norm. 13 years straight, this is the norm every 2 or 3 weeks. How is that acceptable in any way? It's a Ponzi scheme in every sense of the word. It has every single attribute and a couple of hundred more of a Ponzi scheme. Yet the regulatory agencies are out there completely silent. Nano nuclear energy stock sinks on a private placement pricing. But the other media's like, oh, no, everything's great. Go buy their stocks, $24. Belarus orders feasibility study on one more reactor. We're almost through this stuff. And then what picture do they show you? Nuclear power plants surrounded by farms. Every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms. The NDA launches cutting-edge facility to boost nuclear cybersecurity, which is bad news for people like me, because it's not for cybersecurity. It's cybersecurity is getting rid of people like Dina. Baku, where they just had constipated Party 29, and the degenerate International Atomic Energy Agency signs a memorandum of understanding on the development of nuclear energy. Never seen that coming, did we? We said that on day one of the Conference of Pricks 29. Constipated Party 29, I mean. I like Conference of Pricks 29 sounds more realistic, doesn't it? There's the Grossy. Look at the sadistic, demonic look on his face. It's absurd, isn't it? And look at the weasel to your right. Being a weasel just comes natural, don't it? That's the one thing we can all agree upon. Being a weasel is the normal expectations when it comes to somebody in the nuclear industry or the pro-nuclear community. They're literally like a weasel skirting around waiting for you to turn your back so they can jump and feed on something, like your children or your pets. They are predators. There's the most clearest thing imaginable is that these are predators. The one thing that we can all agree upon is this is an industry of predators. And don't forget, I've done research expeditions for 6 years, from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. The species are wiped out. We went back for 5 years, right? Because we wanted to see if the species recovered. Because Fukushima pulse event destroyed everything. You can't even go eating food anymore without being worried sick about what you're going to be putting into you. I got 229 counts per minute on my gamma counter over there. I can't believe we made it. And odds got tilted back in our favor. Thank you, everybody that participated. We got spam tonight. Is fusion energy a useless, despicable, disgusting investment and a purposeful distraction from geothermal that actually exists? Well, yes, it is. So small modular reactors is a distraction from real solutions. They have no intentions of coming up with real solutions. Yeah, that's right, Don. Nobody's commenting. I noticed that myself. Very few comments. Bless everybody that did. Bless everybody that did. And
by fields of green, reactors rise, their lifeblood spills into the skies. Each stalk stands tall, each root digs deep to hold what stacks
see
refuse
everybody
to
tomorrow
keep.
night. Have a great night.
The turbines spin,
You can go over
the
to James
vents
Lewis's
release,
site to
a
hear that
trade
song.
disguised as promised peace.
Great
The
night, folks. We'll
farmers
see everybody
work,
on the next
the
show.
fields renew, while hidden threats escape our view. They place the crops near cooling towers, where roots absorb the fallout showers. The soil takes in what drifts below and locks it where no signs will show. Each harvest scrubs the poison ground, while traces linger all around. The golden fields, the thriving grain, are buffers for what can't remain. They cleanse the air, they cleanse the ground, but never take what can't be found. Oh, golden fields, an endless game. They bury what we can't contain. The cooling towers rise in place, their vapor trails conceal the trace. The roots grow deep, the crops will bind and mask the harm we leave behind.
These farms don't thrive by chance alone. They're planted where the waste is sown. A farmer's pride, a nation's yield.
Mask what reactors fail to shield. The stacks exhale, the air feels clean, but roots hold truth